the value of suffering. There's a really amazing chapter. He has a really good story in here that was really mind blowing to me and completely changed my perspective of the world and what I was taking seriously in the world. Completely fucked me up in a good way, man. Was he tells the story of Metallica and Dave Mustaine. And if y'all don't know the story, the quick rundown, Mark says it, tells it way funnier than I do. But the quick rundown is Dave Mustaine was the original guitarist for Metallica, wrote most of their original music from their very first album. I forget what the fuck the name of their first album even was. I think it was called The Four Horsemen, was it? Metallica's first album. It's been so long since I've heard this album. Metallica's first Kill 'Em All. That's it. Had something to do with Killing 'Em All. Kill 'Em All was the name of their first album, and Dave Mustaine was their original guitarist who wrote the majority of that music. So, in any case, he recorded the first album with Metallica. Their first recording sessions, first album, recorded all those songs for them, played guitar on all those songs, and then woke up one day, had all of his shit packed, all the members of Metallica, they're all living in a house, which is very customary when you're recording bands. I worked in recording studios for like 8-9 years, and very customary for bands to live in a house paid for by the record label, you know, one house with a lot of bedrooms, roommates for however long while they're recording. And especially if they don't live in that city. And all of his bandmates had packed up all of his shit while he was sleeping and told him, get the fuck out. You're kicked out of the band, Dave. And so Dave Mustaine, they gave him a bus ticket and his ass had to ride home on the bus. And then Metallica blew up and became the #1 selling heavy metal band, and is still to this day the #1 selling heavy metal band that's ever, the #1 selling metal band in the world, right? Metallica. And Dave Mustaine took that very fucking personally, that he wrote all that music, helped them record that first album, and then they kicked his ass out. Was very, very pissed off about that, which most people would be, right? And spends the rest of his life hunting down. He starts Megadeth, another one of the 4 top thrash metal bands. When thrash metal came out in the 80s, it was Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and Dave Mustaine's Megadeth. Immediately went out, started Megadeth with the sole purpose of beating Metallica. Be better than Metallica was his whole purpose in life. And unfortunately, it didn't go well for him. In spite of the fact that Dave Mustaine became a multimillionaire, he got super famous. Megadeth became, again, one of the four godfathers of thrash metal bands. He's a legend in the heavy metal world. I'm sure he's in the Hall of Fame. He's known as an incredible musician. Dave Mustaine struggled heavily with depression and sadness. Well, obviously depression, but struggled with depression and drug addictions because of his depression. His life was not a very happy life. It was, filled with this, basically, essentially filled with this constantly being overshadowed by Metallica, the band that kicked him out right before they got big. He never got over that. And he contrasts that story, compares and contrasts it with the story of one of the original Beatles. The first drummer to the Beatles had the exact same thing happen to him. He was the original drummer of the Beatles, was obviously drumming for the Beatles and all their original recording sessions on their first album. And then same thing, booted his ass out. And then they went on to become the fucking Beatles, one of the #1, highest selling artist period of all time, period, And he struggled with severe depression for a long time too, a few years, but eventually got over it and decided what he wanted to do was open up a bar. He found a woman that loved him, that he cared about. They got married, had a bunch of kids. He still went out and played drums in some smaller bands, but he never dedicated his life to getting back at the Beatles. And at the end of his life, I don't know at the end necessarily. I don't know if he's still alive or not. But in his old age, he was much happier. The people that knew him as an incredibly, genuinely kind and amazing person. He was happier. He had a family with all kinds of kids and grandkids and was just all around more pleased or satisfied with the life that he had lived, comparative to Dave Mustaine, who had like overdoses, had been in and out of rehab, had this serious depression for the majority of his life. And in spite of everything he had accomplished in his life, still felt unsatisfied because he never beat Metallica. And that comparison of those two guys fucking blew my mind. It was like, wow, like, and I researched it. I looked into it to make sure that Mark wasn't just making this shit up. And it turns out he's not. And that story definitely put my life into perspective, right? Because yeah, it's just that to me was something that spoke to me personally, right? So that was one of the cooler moments in his book, one of the cooler stories he tells, and you can expect all different kinds of stories in his book that make these points. Really cool, interesting stories about the world that help prove his point. And so, yeah, that's something to look forward to in his book.